Jake Morrison wiped sweat from his forehead as he guided his small salvage ship through the debris field. Broken pieces of metal floated everywhere around him. Some were from human ships, others from the alien Valenti fleet. The battle had ended 3 days ago, but the wreckage would drift here for months. "See anything good out there?" Lisa Grant called from the pilot's seat. She was his partner in this salvage business. They had been working together for 2 years now. Jake looked through his scanner again. Most of the valuable parts had already been taken by the big salvage companies. They always got to the good stuff first. Jake and Lisa were left with the scraps, but scraps still paid the bills. "Nothing yet," Jake said. "Wait, I'm getting a reading over there." He pointed to a twisted piece of hull that looked like it came from a Valenti fighter ship. "Might be some intact power cells." Lisa changed course toward the wreckage. As they got closer, Jake's scanner started beeping faster. That was strange. The beeping usually meant machinery, but this sounded different. It sounded like a life sign. "Lisa, stop the ship," Jake said suddenly. "What's wrong?" "I think there's someone alive in there." Lisa looked at him with surprise. "Jake, that's a Valenti ship. Even if someone is alive, they're our enemy. We should report it to the fleet and move on." Jake stared at the broken fighter ship. It was crushed on one side, and the cockpit was barely visible. But his scanner was definitely picking up life signs. Someone was trapped inside, probably hurt badly. "I can't just leave them," Jake said. "Yes, you can. That's exactly what you should do. The Valenti would do the same to us." Jake knew she was right. The war between humans and the Valenti Empire had been going on for 5 years. The aliens were known for their cruelty. They showed no mercy to prisoners. But Jake had been a medic before he became a salvager. He had taken an oath to help people, even if those people were supposed to be his enemies. "Get me close enough to use the docking tube," Jake said. Lisa shook her head but did as he asked. She knew Jake well enough to know he wouldn't change his mind. "You're crazy," she muttered as she moved the ship into position. Jake put on his environmental suit and grabbed his medical kit. The docking tube connected to what was left of the Valenti ship's airlock. Jake had to cut through several layers of twisted metal to get inside. The inside of the ship was dark and filled with smoke. Emergency lights flickered on and off. Jake followed his scanner toward the life sign. He found the cockpit, or what was left of it. A figure was slumped in the pilot's seat, trapped under a piece of the ceiling that had fallen down. The figure was definitely Valenti. Jake could tell by the strange armor they wore. It was black and silver, and it seemed to be partly machine and partly clothing. But something was wrong with it. Parts of the armor had melted and fused to the pilot's body. She was stuck. Jake realized the pilot was female when he heard her breathing. It was shallow and painful. She was unconscious, but alive. Her helmet had cracked, and he could see part of her face. Her skin was pale blue-gray, and she had markings around her eyes that looked like tattoos. He checked his scanner. She was losing blood and had several broken bones. The melted armor was pressing against her chest, making it hard for her to breathe. If he didn't help her soon, she would die. Jake started working carefully. He used his cutting tools to remove the metal beam that had fallen on her. Then he began the slow process of cutting away the damaged armor. He had to be very careful. One wrong move could hurt her more or even kill her. As he worked, the Valenti pilot stirred. Her eyes opened and she looked at him with confusion. Jake expected her to try to fight him or call for help. Instead, she just watched him work. Her eyes were yellow with black centers, very different from human eyes. "Easy," Jake said softly. even though he knew she probably couldn't understand him. "I'm trying to help you." The armor was harder to remove than Jake expected. It wasn't just clothing. It was connected to her body in several places, like it was part of her. He had to cut very slowly and carefully around these connections. Each time he had to cut near her skin, he would pause and look at her face to make sure she wasn't in pain. This surprised the Valenti pilot. Jake could see it in her eyes. She seemed confused by his gentle approach. Maybe the Valenti were used to rough treatment, even from their own people. It took Jake almost an hour to free her from the damaged armor. When he finally got the last piece off, he could see the full extent of her injuries. She had scars all over her body, some old and some new. The new ones were from the battle, but the old ones told a different story. It looked like she had been hurt many times before. Jake treated her wounds as best he could with his medical supplies. He gave her something for the pain and wrapped her broken ribs. All the while, she watched him with those strange yellow eyes. She never tried to stop him or fight back. When Jake was finished, he carefully lifted her and carried her back to his ship. Lisa was waiting for him at the airlock. "Jake, what have you done?" she asked when she saw the Valenti pilot in his arms. "I saved her life," Jake said simply. "Now we need to get her to the medical bay." As they flew away from the wreckage, Jake looked back at the broken Valenti fighter. He wondered if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life, or if he had done something that might actually matter. Either way, there was no going back now. Kithara woke up slowly. Her body felt strange and light. The constant weight of her armor was gone, and for a moment she panicked. A Valenti warrior was never without armor. It was part of who they were, part of their strength. She tried to sit up quickly, but pain shot through her chest. Her ribs were wrapped in some kind of bandage. She was lying on a soft surface, softer than anything she had ever felt before. The room was small and clean, with white walls and gentle lighting. This was not a Valenti ship. This was not a Valenti prison either. Kithara had seen those before, and they were dark, cold places where prisoners were kept in metal cages. This place was warm and comfortable. The door opened, and the human male who had freed her from the wreckage walked in. He was carrying a tray with food and water. Kithara tensed, ready to fight, but her body was too weak. She could barely lift her arms. "Good, you're awake," Jake said. He set the tray down on a small table next to the bed. "How do you feel?" Kithara stared at him. She understood some human language from her military training, but his voice was gentle, not threatening. This confused her. She had been taught that humans were savage creatures who enjoyed causing pain. But this human had spent hours carefully removing her armor and treating her wounds. "Water?" Jake asked, holding up a cup. Kithara was very thirsty, but she didn't trust him. This had to be some kind of trap. Maybe the humans had new ways of getting information from prisoners. Maybe they drugged their captives to make them talk. Jake seemed to understand her suspicion. He took a sip of the water himself, then offered it to her again. "It's just water," he said. "No drugs, no poison." Kithara's thirst won out over her caution. She took the cup with shaking hands and drank. The water was cool and clean, better than anything she had tasted in months. On Valenti ships, warriors got recycled water that often tasted like metal. "Are you hungry?" Jake asked, pointing to the food on the tray. The food looked strange to Kithara. It wasn't the processed nutrient blocks that Valenti warriors ate. This looked like it had actual flavors and textures. Her stomach growled loudly, betraying her hunger. Jake smiled and pushed the tray closer to her. Go ahead. You need to eat, to get your strength back. Cathara ate slowly, waiting for the food to make her sick or to drug her into unconsciousness. But nothing happened. The food actually tasted good. It had been so long since she had eaten anything that wasn't just about survival. My name is Jake, the human said while she ate. What's your name? Cathara looked at him suspiciously. In Valenti culture, knowing someone's name gave you power over them. But this human didn't seem like he wanted power over her. He seemed genuinely curious. Cathara, she said finally, her voice rough from not speaking for days. Cathara, Jake repeated, pronouncing it carefully. That's a beautiful name. No one had ever called Kithra's name beautiful before. In the Valenti Empire, names were just labels. Beauty was weakness, and weakness meant death. She didn't know how to respond to his compliment. Over the next few days, Jake came to check on her regularly. He brought her food and water, changed her bandages, and made sure she was healing properly. Each time he was gentle and careful. He always asked permission before touching her, which was something no one had ever done before. On the third day, Cathara was strong enough to walk around the small medical bay. She examined every inch of the room, looking for weapons or escape routes. She found medical equipment, extra bandages and bottles of medicine, but nothing that could be used as a weapon. When Jake came in that afternoon, he found her standing by the small window, looking out at the stars. Where are we going? She asked. Back to human space, Jake said honestly. It will take about 2 weeks with our engine problems. 2 weeks. Cathara had 2 weeks to figure out how to escape or signal for rescue. But as the days passed, she found herself less and less interested in escape. Jake brought her books with pictures that showed human art and culture. He played music for her, strange melodies that were nothing like the war songs of her people. Why are you doing this? She asked him one day. Doing what? Being kind to me. I am your enemy. Jake was quiet for a moment. You were hurt. I'm a medic. I help hurt people. It doesn't matter what side they're on. But your people must hate mine. We have killed many humans. And humans have killed many Valenti, Jake said. But hating you won't bring anyone back. It won't end the war either. Cathara had never heard anyone talk like this before. In her world, enemies were enemies forever. There was no room for understanding or forgiveness. But Jake seemed to see her as a person, not just a Valenti warrior. Tell me about your home, Jake said one evening as he brought her dinner. Cathara described the harsh world where she was born, where children were taken from their families at age 5 to begin warrior training. She told him about the endless drills, the punishments for showing weakness, and the scars that covered her body from years of combat training. Jake listened without judgment. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. That sounds like a hard life, he said finally. It is the only life I know, Cathara replied. Maybe it doesn't have to be, Jake said softly. That night, Cathara lay awake thinking about his words. For the first time in her life, she wondered if there might be other ways to live, other ways to be strong. The human had shown her kindness without expecting anything in return. He had healed her wounds and asked for nothing but her name. She touched the bandages on her ribs, remembering how carefully he had wrapped them. No one had ever undressed her gently before. In her world, armor was removed roughly, quickly, without care for the person inside. But Jake had treated her like she was valuable, like she mattered. As the ship continued through space toward human territory, Kithara found herself hoping the journey would take longer than 2 weeks. She wasn't ready. To return to her old life, not yet. Maybe not ever. The engine failure happened on the 8th day of their journey. Lisa was in the engine room cursing at the broken parts when she called Jake over the ship's communication system. "Jake, we've got a problem. The main drive is completely dead. We're stuck drifting until I can fix it." Jake looked at Kithara, who was sitting across from him in the small common area. She had been learning to play a human card game, something that would have been considered frivolous and weak in Valenti culture, but she seemed to enjoy it. "How long will it take to fix?" Jake asked into his communicator. "Could be days. Could be weeks. I need to fabricate some new parts, and that takes time." Kithara set down her cards. "This is not an accident," she said quietly. "What do you mean?" "Your ship was working fine. Now it breaks when we are halfway to human space. Either your people or mine have found us." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He hadn't thought about that possibility. Both fleets would be looking for them. The humans would want to question Kithara, and the Valenti would want her back. Neither side would be happy about their unusual situation. "We should prepare," Kithara said. "If it is my people who find us, they will kill you. If it is your people, they will imprison me." "Maybe neither will find us," Jake said, but he didn't sound convinced. Over the next few days, they waited while Lisa worked on the engines. Jake and Kithara spent more time together, and she began teaching him basic Valenti words. Her language was harsh and angular, designed for giving orders in battle. But when she spoke slowly and carefully, Jake found it had its own strange beauty. "This word means strength," she said, showing him how to make the complex sound. "In my language, everything important relates to strength or weakness." "What's the word for kindness?" Jake asked. Kithara was quiet for a long moment. "There is no word for kindness in Valenti," she said finally. "The closest word means weakness that leads to death." "That's sad," Jake said. "Why is it sad? Kindness is not useful in war. But we're not at war right now. Right here in this ship, there's no war. There's just us." Kithara looked around the small common area. Jake had made it comfortable for her with soft cushions and warm blankets. He had shared his food, his books, his music. She was beginning to understand what he meant. "Teach me the human word for what you have shown me," she said. "Compassion," Jake said. "It means caring about someone else's pain and wanting to help them." Kithara repeated the word several times, trying to get the pronunciation right. "Compassion. This is what you showed me when you removed my armor. Yes. And this is what you show me every day when you bring me food and check my wounds. Yes." Kithara was quiet for a long time. Then she reached out and touched Jake's hand gently. It was the first time she had initiated physical contact with him. "I want to learn more human words," she said. Jake smiled and squeezed her hand gently. "I'll teach you all the words you want to know." They spent hours together each day. Jake taught Kithara about human art, literature, and philosophy. She was amazed by the idea that humans created things just for beauty, not for war or survival. She especially loved the music, closing her eyes and listening to melodies that spoke of love, hope, and peace. In return, Kithara taught Jake about Valenti history and culture. But the more she talked about her people, the more she began to question their ways. Why did strength have to come from causing pain? Why couldn't it come from protecting others instead? In human stories, she said one evening, the heroes save people. In Valenti stories, the heroes conquer people. Which is better? What do you think? Jake asked. I think saving is harder than conquering. It requires more strength to heal than to destroy. Jake smiled. I think you're right. On the 10th day of their engine problems, the ship's sensors detected another vessel approaching. Lisa came running to the common area, her face pale with worry. We've got company, she said. And it's a big ship. Military. Jake and Cathara looked at each other. This was what they had been afraid of. Can you tell if it's human or Valenti? Jake asked. Lisa checked her instruments. It's both. There are two ships, a human cruiser and a Valenti warship. They're flying in formation. That's impossible, Cathara said. Human and Valenti ships do not work together. But as the ships got closer, it became clear that Lisa was right. The two vessels were flying side by side, neither attacking the other. Jake's communication system started receiving signals from both ships. This is Commander Alex Kane of the human fleet, came the first voice. Salvage vessel, please respond. Then, another voice, speaking in Valenti. This is Battle Leader Thex Vor. Return our warrior immediately. Jake looked at Cathara. What do we do? Cathara stood up slowly. She had been thinking about this moment for days. We tell them the truth, she said. We tell them what we have learned. They won't believe us. Maybe not. But we have to try. If there is a chance for peace, even a small one, we must take it. Jake nodded. He activated the communication system and sent a message to both ships. This is Jake Morrison. I have Valenti warrior Cathara aboard my ship. She is injured but alive. I request permission to speak with both commanders before any action is taken. There was a long silence. Then Commander Kane's voice came back. Permission granted. Prepare to be boarded. The Valenti response was shorter. The warrior will be returned. The humans will be destroyed. Cathara touched Jake's shoulder. I will not let them hurt you, she said quietly. You saved my life. Now I will save yours. As the boarding shuttles approached their small ship, Jake and Cathara stood together. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The war between their peoples had brought them together, but what they had learned from each other might be the key to ending that war, or it might get them both killed. But some risks were worth taking. The space station was neutral territory, a place where both humans and Valenti could meet without starting another battle. Jake had never seen anything like it. Half the station was built in human style, with curved walls and warm lighting. The other half was Valenti design, all sharp angles and cold metal. Jake sat in the human section's conference room with Commander Kane and 3 other officers. Through the thick window, he could see the Valenti section across a wide gap. Somewhere, over there, Cathara was facing her own people. Let me understand this correctly, Commander Kane said, looking at his report. You rescued an enemy combatant, brought her aboard your ship, and spent 2 weeks becoming friends with her. Yes, sir. And now you believe this friendship can somehow end a 5-year war. Jake knew how it sounded. He knew these officers thought he was naive or crazy, maybe both. I believe understanding can end wars better than fighting. One of the other officers, a woman named Colonel Peters, shook her head. The Valenti don't understand anything except strength. They've proven that over and over. Cathara is different, Jake said. She's learned. She's changed. One Valenti, Warrior doesn't represent their entire empire, Commander Kane said. Even if she has changed, which I doubt, it doesn't matter. Her leaders will never change. How do you know if you don't try? The room fell silent. Jake could see the doubt in their faces. These were military people who had been fighting the Valenti for years. They had lost friends and family to this war. The idea of peace seemed impossible to them. Across the gap in the Valenti section, Cathara knelt before 3 members of the Warrior Council. Battle leader Thex Vor stood over her, his armor gleaming black in the harsh lights. He was her former commander, the one who had trained her to kill without mercy. "You have brought shame to your warrior line," Thex Vor said in the Valenti language. "You were captured by humans and allowed them to corrupt your mind." "I was rescued by a human," Cathara replied, keeping her voice steady. "He showed me compassion when he could have left me to die." "Compassion is weakness. You know this." I thought I knew this. Now I know I was wrong. The 3 council members looked at each other with disgust. One of them, an older warrior named Kex Thar, stepped forward. "You speak of human weakness as if it were strength," he said. "You have forgotten what it means to be Valenti." "No," Cathara said, standing up slowly. "I have remembered what it means to be alive. For years we have been taught that we are weapons, tools of war. But we are more than that. We can choose to protect instead of destroy." Thex Vor struck her across the face with his armored hand. Cathara fell to the ground, blood running from her mouth. In the old days, she would have stayed down, accepting the punishment. But something had changed in her. She stood up again. "Strike me again if you wish," she said. "It will not change what I have learned. The human Jake Morrison showed me that strength can come from kindness, that healing is harder than hurting, that there are other ways to live. You will renounce these." "Human lies," Thex Vor said. "You will declare your loyalty to the Empire, or you will be executed as a traitor." Cathara looked through the window toward the human section. She couldn't see Jake, but she knew he was there. He had risked everything to save her life, and now she would risk everything for the truth they had discovered together. "I will not renounce them," she said clearly, "because they are not lies." In the human conference room, Jake was making his own stand. Commander Kane had just finished explaining why Cathara would be transferred to a military prison for interrogation. "She's not a threat," Jake said. "She's an opportunity." "An opportunity for what?" "For peace. She can speak to her people in ways we never could. She understands both sides now." "Even if that were true," Colonel Peters said, "her own people will probably execute her for treason. The Valenti don't tolerate weakness." "Then we protect her," Jake said. "We give her asylum. And start a diplomatic incident that could make this war even worse," Commander Kane replied. "I'm sorry, Jake, but we can't risk it." Jake stood up suddenly. "You want to know what's risky? Continuing this war for another 5 years? Another 10 years? How many more people have to die because we're too afraid to try something different?" The room was quiet. Jake could see that his words had affected them, but he could also see their fear. They were soldiers, trained to fight. Peace was harder to imagine than war. "Give me 5 minutes with their council," Jake said. "Let me talk to them directly." "Absolutely not," Commander Kane said. "You're a civilian. You have no authority to negotiate." "I'm not talking about negotiation. I'm talking about truth." Colonel Peters looked interested. "What kind of truth?" "The truth about what happened between Cathara and me. The truth about what we learned from each other. Maybe it won't change anything, but maybe it will." Commander Kane considered this. Jake could see him weighing the risks against the possibilities. Finally, he nodded. 5 minutes, he said. But you'll be under heavy guard. An hour later, Jake stood in the Valenti council chamber. The 3 Valenti warriors looked at him with barely controlled hatred. Kithara knelt on the floor between them, her hands bound with metal restraints. "You have corrupted our warrior," Thex Vor said in broken human language. "You will pay for this crime." "I didn't corrupt her," Jake said calmly. "I showed her kindness, and she chose to respond to it. That choice came from inside her, not from me." "Kindness is weakness," another council member growled. "Is it?" Jake asked. "It took more strength for me to save Kithara than it would have to leave her to die. It took more courage for her to stand up for the truth than it would have to lie to you. How is that weakness?" He looked directly at Kithara. "When I found her, she was trapped in broken armor. But the real prison wasn't the metal. It was the idea that she had no choice but to be a weapon. I helped her out of both prisons." Kithara raised her head and looked at him. Even bound and bleeding, her eyes were clear and determined. "Tell them," Jake said softly. "Tell them what you learned." Kithara spoke in Valenti, her voice growing stronger with each word. Jake couldn't understand everything she said, but he could hear the passion in her voice. She was telling them about compassion, about choice, about the possibility of strength through protection instead of destruction. When she finished, the council chamber was silent. Then Thex Vor drew his weapon. "Enough," he said. "You die now, traitor, and then we will kill the human." But as he raised his weapon, Kithara did something that shocked everyone in the room. She broke her restraints with a sudden burst of strength and stepped between Jake and the weapon. "If you want to kill him," she said, "you will have to kill me first." The standoff lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. Then, from behind the council members, another voice spoke. "Lower your weapon, Thex Vor." Everyone turned to see an elderly Valenti warrior entering the chamber. Jake had never seen him before. But by the way the council members immediately stepped back, he was clearly someone very important. "Elder Vexmon," Thex Vor said, confusion in his voice. "What are you doing here?" The elderly warrior looked at Kithara, then at Jake, then back at the council. "I am here," he said slowly, "to hear more about this compassion." 6 months had passed since the meeting at the neutral station. Jake stood on the observation deck of the human diplomatic vessel, watching as ships from both fleets moved carefully around each other. It was still strange to see human and Valenti, vessels so close without shooting, but it was happening more often now. The changes had started slowly. Elder Vexmon had taken Kithara back to the Valenti homeworld, not as a prisoner, but as someone with important information. She had spoken to the warrior councils, telling them about human compassion and the strength that came from protecting others instead of conquering them. Not all Valenti had listened. Many still believed that weakness led to death, that showing mercy was the same as surrendering, but some had heard her words and wondered if there might be truth in them. Young warriors especially began to question the old ways. Thex Vor had been one of the biggest surprises. After seeing Kithara's courage in protecting Jake, something had changed in him. He began to see that true strength might mean more than just the ability to destroy. He became one of Kithara's strongest supporters in the warrior councils. On the human side, things had moved even faster. Jake's report about his time with Kithara had been read by officials all the way up to the highest levels of government. Some called him a hero. Others said he was a dangerous fool who had gotten lucky. But everyone agreed that his actions had opened a door that no one had expected. Commander Kane had become the head of a new department focused on understanding Valenti culture. Colonel Peters was working with Jake to train diplomats in basics, Valenti language and customs. It was slow work, but it was progress. The door to the observation deck opened, and Lisa walked in. She had been promoted to captain of her own ship, part of the new fleet of vessels designed for exploration and diplomacy instead of warfare. "The transport just arrived," she said. "Kithara's shuttle is requesting permission to dock." Jake felt his heart speed up. He hadn't seen Kithara since the meeting at the station. They had exchanged messages through official channels, but it wasn't the same as being in the same room. He had missed her more than he cared to admit. "Permission granted," he said into his communicator. 20 minutes later, Jake waited in the docking bay as the Valenti shuttle settled onto the landing platform. The door opened, and Kithara stepped out. She looked different than when he had last seen her. She still wore armor, but it was lighter, more flexible. The harsh black and silver had been replaced with softer colors. Behind her came 3 other Valenti warriors, young ones who had chosen to follow her path. They were part of what some people were calling the New Valenti, warriors who believed in protection over conquest. "Jake," Kithara said, walking toward him. Her voice was exactly as he remembered it. "Kithara." He wanted to hug her, but he wasn't sure if that would be appropriate in front of the other Valenti. Instead, he held out his hand. She looked at his hand for a moment, then surprised him by pulling him into a brief embrace. The other warriors watched with interest, but no judgment. This was something else that had changed. The new Valenti were learning that showing affection wasn't the same as showing weakness. "How have you been?" Jake asked as they walked toward the conference room where the peace talks would take place. "Busy," Kithara said. "And you?" "The same. Are you ready for this?" Today was important. Representatives from both governments were meeting to discuss the possibility of a formal ceasefire. It wouldn't end the war completely, but it would be a start. And Jake and Kithara would be there as advisors, representing the bridge they had built between their peoples. The conference room was large and formal, with representatives from both sides sitting across from each other at a long table. Jake took his seat with the human delegation. Kithara sat with the Valenti, but she looked across the table at him and smiled slightly. The talks lasted for hours. There were arguments, misunderstandings, and moments when it seemed like the whole thing might fall apart. But every time tensions got too high, Jake or Kithara would speak up, sharing their experience and reminding everyone why they were there. "The war started because we didn't understand each other," Jake said during one difficult moment. "We saw differences and assumed they meant we had to be enemies. But difference doesn't have to mean conflict. It can mean growth." Kithara nodded. "My people have always believed that strength comes from defeating others. But Jake taught me that true strength comes from lifting others up. When we help instead of hurt, we become stronger, not weaker." By the end of the day, they had an agreement. It was small, limited to certain border systems, but it was real. For the first time in 5 years, there would be areas where humans and Valenti could meet without fighting. That evening, Jake and Kithara walked through the ship's garden, a quiet space filled with plants from dozens of different worlds. They moved slowly, enjoying the peace after the long day of negotiations. "Do you think it will work?" Jake asked. "The ceasefire, I mean." "I think it is a beginning," Kithara said. "Not all of my people will accept it." Not all of yours will either, but beginnings are important. They stopped by a window that looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there on both human and Valenti worlds, people were learning that their enemies might not be so different from themselves. "I have something for you," Kythera said. She reached into her armor and pulled out a small piece of metal. It was curved and smooth, obviously crafted with great care. "What is it?" Jake asked, taking the object. "Part of my old armor. The piece you cut away to free me." She touched his hand gently. "I had it shaped into something new. In my language, it means gentle strength." Jake looked at the beautiful piece of metalwork. It was warm to the touch and seemed to catch the light in interesting ways. "Thank you," he said. "I'll treasure it." "You gave me something much more valuable," Kythera said. "You gave me the choice to be something other than a weapon. You always had that choice. I just helped you see it." Kythera was quiet for a moment, looking out at the stars. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we keep building bridges," Jake said. "We keep showing people that understanding is possible. We keep proving that different doesn't have to mean enemy." "Together?" Jake smiled and took her hand. Together. As they stood there, watching the stars and thinking about the future, both knew that the road ahead would be difficult. There would be setbacks, misunderstandings, and people on both sides who preferred war to peace. But they also knew that they had proven something important. They had proven that a single act of compassion could change everything. Jake had helped Kythera out of her broken armor, both physical and mental. In return, she had helped him see that healing was indeed harder than hurting, and infinitely more worthwhile. The war between humans and the Valenti Empire wasn't over, but for the first time, peace seemed possible. And it had all started with one person choosing to be gentle with another person's pain. In the end, maybe that was what made humans special in the galaxy. Not their technology or their weapons, but their ability to see enemies as individuals, to choose compassion over cruelty, and to believe that understanding was always worth the risk. The future was uncertain, but it was no longer hopeless. And sometimes, hope was enough to change everything. 2 years after the first ceasefire agreement, Jake found himself standing in a place he never thought he would see. The Valenti homeworld was a harsh planet of red stone and purple skies, but it had a strange beauty that took his breath away. Tall spires reached toward the alien stars, and the air hummed with the sound of flying vehicles moving between the buildings. He was part of the first official human delegation to visit the planet. The group included diplomats, scientists, and cultural experts, all working to strengthen the growing peace between their peoples. Jake was there as a special advisor, someone who understood both sides in ways that few others could. Kythera met him at the landing platform. She wore new armor that blended Valenti and human design elements. It was still protective, but it looked more like art than a weapon. Her position in Valenti society had changed dramatically. She was now a voice of the new path, a leader who spoke for those who wanted to move beyond the old ways of endless war. "Welcome to Valenti Prime," she said, using the formal greeting required for official visits. But her eyes were warm, and Jake could see the smile she was hiding. "Thank you for having us," Jake replied, equally formal. They had learned to be careful about showing their friendship too openly. Some Valenti still saw any sign of human influence as weakness, and some humans still didn't trust any alien, even reformed ones. The delegation was taken to the council chambers, a massive building that had been the center of Valenti military power for thousands of years. The walls were covered with carvings showing great battles and conquered worlds. But newer carvings had been added recently, showing scenes of cooperation and protection instead of domination. Elder Vexmon greeted the human delegation with the traditional Valenti gesture of respect. He was older now, and his movements were slower, but his mind was still sharp. He had become the strongest supporter of the peace process among the old guard Valenti leaders. "You honor us with your presence," he said in carefully practiced human language. "We hope this visit will bring greater understanding between our peoples." The formal ceremonies took most of the day. There were speeches, gift exchanges, and tours of important cultural sites. Jake found it all interesting, but he was looking forward to the evening when he and Cathara could talk privately. That evening, she took him to a place called the Garden of Memory. It was built on a hilltop overlooking the capital city, and it was filled with plants from worlds throughout the Valenti Empire. But this wasn't a display of conquest. Each plant had been brought back by Valenti explorers who wanted to preserve and protect life, not destroy it. "This is what we could have been all along," Kithara said as they walked among the alien flowers and trees. "Explorers instead of conquerors. Protectors instead of destroyers." "How many Valenti think like that now?" Jake asked. "More every day. The young ones especially. They see what we accomplished with the peace talks, and they want to be part of building something instead of tearing it down." She paused by a tree with silver leaves that chimed softly in the breeze. "But change is slow. Some of the old warrior clans still resist." Jake had seen evidence of that resistance during the day's meetings. Several council members had been polite but cold, clearly unhappy about having humans on their homeworld. The Yaba ceasefire was holding, but it was still fragile. "What about Thex Vor?" Jake asked. "How is he doing with the new path?" Cathara smiled genuinely for the first time that day. "He has surprised everyone, including himself. He started a training program for young warriors, teaching them that protection requires more skill than destruction. His students are some of our best advocates for peace." They found a bench overlooking the city and sat down together. The alien stars were coming out, and the lights of the capital spread below them like a carpet of jewels. It was beautiful, but Jake could see the defensive positions built into the city's design. Even with the peace process, the Valenti were still preparing for war. "There's something I need to tell you," Jake said carefully. "Some of our military leaders are getting nervous. They think the peace is moving too fast." Cathara's expression darkened. "What do they want?" "They want to slow down the cultural exchanges. They're worried that too much cooperation might give away human technological advantages." "And what do you think?" Jake was quiet for a moment. "I think fear is what started this war in the first place. If we let fear guide us now, we'll end up fighting again." "My people have the same fears," Cathara admitted. "Some council members think we are becoming too much like humans, that we are losing what makes us Valenti." "Are we? Losing what makes us who we are?" Cathara considered this seriously. "I think we are becoming better versions of who we always could have been. But change is frightening, even when it is good change." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city below. Finally, Jake spoke again. "I have an idea. It might be crazy, but I think it could help." "Tell me. What if we created a joint colony? A place where humans and Valenti could live and work together? Not just diplomats and officials, but families. People who want to build something new." Kithara turned to look at him with surprise. "That would be incredibly difficult. The logistics alone but think about what it could prove. That our peoples can not just coexist, but thrive together. That cooperation makes us stronger, not weaker. Where would this colony be? I found a planet during my salvage days. It's in neutral space, unclaimed by either empire. Good resources, suitable climate for both species. I've been thinking about it for months. Kythera was quiet for a long time, thinking. Jake could see her mind working through the possibilities and problems. Finally, she nodded slowly. It could work. But we would need support from both governments, and volunteers willing to take the risk. I know people who would be interested. Lisa, for one. Some of the other former salvagers who've worked with Valenti crews, and scientists who are excited about the possibility of joint research. I know Valenti who would join as well. Young warriors looking for a new purpose. Families who are tired of living in fear of the next battle. Jake felt excitement building in his chest. This could be the next step, the thing that moved their peoples beyond mere peace toward actual unity. We would have to be careful how we present it, Kythera continued. Some will see it as dangerous mixing of cultures. Others will see it as weakness. Or they might see it as the future, Jake said. A future where our children grow up thinking of each other as neighbors instead of enemies. Kythera smiled, and this time she didn't try to hide it. You always think big, don't you? Someone has to. Small dreams don't change the galaxy. As they walked back toward the city, both of them were already planning. They would need to approach the right people, build support carefully, and overcome 1,000 obstacles. But they had done impossible things before. The colony would become their next project, their next bridge between worlds. And maybe, if they were very lucky and very careful, it would become the foundation for something even greater. A future where the war between their peoples would be just a sad chapter in history books, remembered mainly for how it ended in understanding and cooperation. The dream was ambitious, maybe even crazy. But as Jake had learned from Kythera's people, sometimes the most important victories required the courage to attempt the impossible. The planet they had chosen was called Haven by the humans and Kethvara by the Valenti, which meant new beginning in their language. It orbited a yellow star much like Earth's sun, and it had 2 small moons that created beautiful double moonrises. The surface was mostly green forests and blue oceans, with mountain ranges that reminded Jake of home. Standing in the temporary command center, Jake watched through the large windows as the first permanent buildings took shape. Human and Valenti. Construction crews worked side by side, their different technologies creating structures that were unlike anything either species had built before. The buildings were strong like Valenti architecture, but comfortable like human designs. The housing complex should be finished next week, Lisa said, walking up beside him with a datapad in her hands. She had been chosen as the colony's operations director, managing the day-to-day work of building their new home, and the medical center is ahead of schedule. Any problems with the mixed crews? Jake asked. A few at first, some cultural misunderstandings about work schedules and break times. But they're learning from each other. Yesterday, I saw a Valenti engineer teaching a human crew how to reinforce foundations, while the humans showed the Valenti team how to install environmental controls. Jake smiled. This was exactly what he had hoped would happen. When people worked together toward a common goal, their differences became strengths instead of barriers. Kythera entered the command center, her new armor dusty from inspecting the agricultural areas. She had been working with both human farmers and Valenti food specialists to develop crops that could feed both species. It was more complicated than it sounded, since their nutritional needs were different. "The first test harvest is ready," she announced. "We will know tomorrow if the hybrid grains can support both our peoples." "And if they can't?" Jake asked. "Then we try again. Failure is just another step toward success." That was something new. Kithara had learned from human philosophy. The old Valenti way would have been to abandon anything that didn't work perfectly the first time. But humans had taught her that persistence and learning from mistakes were forms of strength too. The door opened again, and Elder Vexmon walked in with Commander Kane. The two leaders had become unlikely friends over the past year, bonding over their shared responsibility for making the colony work. Both their governments were watching this experiment carefully. "How many families have committed to the move?" Commander Kane asked. 47 human families and 32 Valenti clans, Lisa replied. "That's enough for a viable community, but small enough to manage the integration process carefully." Elder Vexmon nodded approvingly. "Quality over quantity. Better to start small and grow strong than to start large and create problems." "What about the children's education?" Jake asked. That had been one of the biggest challenges. How do you create schools for human and Valenti children who would grow up together? Dr. Martinez and Scholar Yexkin have designed a curriculum that teaches both cultures, Kithara said. The children will learn human creativity and Valenti discipline. They will study both species' histories, but with emphasis on understanding rather than conflict. "It sounds almost too good to be true," Commander Kane said, but he didn't sound doubtful. He sounded hopeful. "The hardest part is still ahead of us," Jake admitted. "Building the colony is the easy part. Building a community is much harder." That evening, Jake and Kithara walked through the partially completed town center. Streetlights illuminated pathways that curved between buildings, designed to accommodate both human and Valenti architectural preferences. Gardens showed careful, planning to include plants that both species found beautiful. They stopped at the Memorial Plaza, a circular area where they planned to honor those who had died in the war. It wouldn't focus on victories or defeats, but on the hope that their sacrifice would lead to a better future. "Do you ever wonder if we're trying to do too much?" Kithara asked. "Every day," Jake admitted. "But then I remember how impossible it seemed when I first found you in that wreckage. If we could overcome that, maybe we can overcome anything." "Some of my people still think I am a traitor to my species," Kithara said quietly. "They say I have become too human." "What do you think?" "I think I have become more myself than I ever was before. The old way made us all the same, like weapons in an armory. This new way lets us be individuals while still being part of something larger." They reached the center of the plaza, where a fountain would eventually be built. The design combined flowing water like humans preferred with angular crystals that pleased Valenti aesthetics. Even something as simple as a fountain had required compromise and creativity. "Jake," Kithara said, her voice serious. "There is something I need to tell you." "What is it?" "The Valenti Council has asked me to take a mate. They want me to have children who can continue the new path." Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. "And?" "I told them I had already chosen my mate." Jake's heart started beating faster. "Kithara, I know this complicates everything. Humans and Valenti have never... The biological differences alone would require medical intervention, and politically, it could damage the peace process. Or it could strengthen it," Jake said slowly. "A marriage between our species would be The ultimate symbol that we can build a future together. It would also make us targets for those who oppose the peace. From both sides. Jake took her hands in his. They were strong hands, scarred from years of war, but gentle when they touched him. Are you asking me if I'm willing to take that risk? I'm asking if you want to build this new world together, not just as friends or partners, but as something more. Jake looked around at the colony they were creating. Buildings rose in the darkness, lit by work lights as construction continued through the night. Human and Valenti crews worked side by side, building something that had never existed before. It was dangerous, ambitious, and possibly foolish. It was also beautiful. Yes, he said simply. Kythera smiled. And it was the brightest thing in the darkness. Then, we will face whatever comes together. Together, Jake agreed. As they walked back toward the temporary housing, both of them knew that their decision would create new challenges. There would be opposition from traditionalists on both sides. There would be medical complications to work through. There would be political consequences that neither of them could predict, but they had faced impossible odds before. They had turned enemies into allies, war into peace, and fear into hope. If they could do all that, maybe they could also prove that love could bridge any gap between peoples. The colony of Haven was being built with metal and stone and technology, but its real foundation was being built with something much more powerful. The belief that differences could become strengths, that understanding could overcome hatred, and that two people from different worlds could create something new and beautiful together. In the distance, the double moons of Haven rose over the horizon, casting silver light on their growing dream.